This is the Freeheel Life Podcast, episode number 34. I'm your host, Josh Madsen, coming at you from the Freeheel Life shop in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I, as always, am pumped to be here. And I'm going to be by myself today after having a couple episodes of hanging out with some wonderful people. And I, as always, want to thank them for taking the time to talk to me on this podcast, because it's a really great opportunity for me to chop it up with some old friends and meet some new people and get some history and gear advice. And the last couple episodes were with some really cool guide friends of mine, and I actually learned a lot. And I think what this podcast is reminding me about is how to so many different aspects that make up telemark skiing and snow travel and being in the mountains, and just the importance of being well-rounded in all those aspects. So I'm definitely getting the inspiration myself from talking to these people and learning new stuff as we go along. So I really appreciate that. And I've got a fairly good list of guests coming up that I'm stoked about, and I feel like it's pretty diverse, and I think we'll have some good stuff to kind of get us at least to the winter. And I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about once the snow flies again up here in the Northern Hemisphere. Kind of on that note, as far as news goes, I thought one of the most interesting things that kind of popped up in the last couple weeks was the closure of some ski resorts down in Australia. I have not had a chance to really dig beyond this one particular announcement, so I'm not sure if more are shut down. I'll make sure to look into that a little further. But these two are owned by Vail Resorts, Falls Creek and Mount Hotham, and I'm just reading off their press release, which is I'm actually on their Instagram page. It just says, due to stage 3 COVID-19 restrictions for the state of Victoria and the border closure with New South Wales, we have made the difficult decision to suspend operations at Hotham and Falls Creek effective Thursday, 9th of July through at least the 19th of August. So I know when I heard that was definitely, I think they only made it a week being open, because I had spoken to those Telly guys, which is a group of gentlemen running a fantastic podcast down in that area. I think Falls Creek's actually their home mountain, and they were feeling pretty optimistic. So it's interesting to kind of see. I know we're watching up here, and we're kind of hoping to get an inkling of what our winter may look like in a COVID, second wave, or a continuation of what's going on now in the Northern Hemisphere, or in the United States. I shouldn't say Northern Hemisphere, because it's definitely a little more isolated to where we're at. But I'm going to see if, I'm going to try and maybe see if I can track somebody down that may have some more information. I'm not sure how many people that work in marketing for a resort may really want to talk about that at this point. I'm sure they're concerned about a lot of different aspects of pass sales and things like that. But I thought it was worth mentioning for those that are kind of keeping their eyes on that, to see that happen down there, where, essentially they're experiencing a new ski season with this, where we have not. I thought that was worth mentioning. So take it as you will, but I thought I would let you know about it so you can look into it more. Other news, I'm going to kind of start, I've been really kind of thinking about this. We're going to kind of start getting things flowing, get the blood flowing a little bit on our social media and our website, on the Freeheel Life stuff, Telemark Skier Magazine. Kind of took a little bit of a break for the summer, but I think come August, you can probably start expecting to see content a little more. I kind of missed you guys. I did miss you guys, not kind of. I know I get to talk here on the podcast, but I'm excited to get back and start kind of producing some content, talk about gear that's going to be coming out. I know I was talking to our shop manager, Taylor Johnson, and I was also talking to Craig Dostie, who does a lot of the Telemark Skier magazine reviews for us. And there's some exciting stuff coming out. And I think we can kind of gear the gear, so to speak, talk to you guys about some fun stuff that is coming up that, we may be able to talk about even, hey, if this becomes more of a backcountry season in some areas, here's what you could use. Or, hey, you're new to the backcountry, maybe what you can look for there. And hopefully all of our resorts are open. I have no predictions for you. Let's just put it that way. So we're going to bring it back and start kind of getting on there and talking to you guys about stuff. With that said, if you don't follow us on Instagram, Facebook, our Facebook forum for Telemark Skier Magazine, if you are not on our YouTube channel, that's another really great one. I try to put the videos across all the platforms so you can follow those, but YouTube's a good one. If you absolutely hate being on the internet and you like to get an email, go to our website at freeheellife.com, sign up for the email list, and that's a good way to get information as well. Usually when it's really happening, we'll fire off those emails once a week, and we'd love to have you on there. Point being, we're going to talk to you more, and I'm excited about it. We at Freeheel Life shop are going to be fully stocked, ready to rock and roll this year. And we, obviously with all this stuff going on, I just wanted to make sure you guys know. I feel like it's kind of like when you're driving around your town. I know at least here in Salt Lake, people have put signs out saying, we're open. Well, affirmative, we are open. And we start actually getting stock in. I think we have some of our stuff starting to show up 1st of September. So we would love to be your preferred Telemark shop. We would love to be your preferred point of contact for all things Telemark. And we just want you to know we're going to be here, and we're going to hold the line, and we're going to be fully stocked with boots, bindings, skis, apparel, all the goodies, parts. And we look forward to helping you guys out this year. So that is newsroom and notes for today, people. I wanted to utilize today as kind of an opportunity to do sort of a mailbag episode. You guys have been fantastic, sending in some awesome emails to me at the podcast at freeheellife.com email. And I am very grateful for that, because I hear some amazing stories. I know some people get a little worried. They might get a little long-winded. There's no long-winded emails. You can write whatever you want. I love the stories. I love the origin stories. I love hearing how you got into Telemark. I love knowing what little gear things. I haven't had too many corrections. But if you ever hear something and you're just like, Madsen's full of BS, feel free to let me know, because I'm sure that I'll get something wrong at some point. I think the only correction that I came across in my notes today was in the episode of Kim Miller, who's the CEO at Scarpa. I had suggested that he was involved with the flick lock poles at Black Diamond. Someone had wrote me and told me that may not be true from their recollection. But other than that, I didn't think that was too serious to mention. So let's jump right into this. I'm kind of shooting from the cuff. I don't really have like a format I'm necessarily going to follow. I've printed out some of these questions that people have written in, and I'm just going to kind of let it roll. And I don't have any pre-prepared answers for these questions, so I guess we'll just kind of see where it goes. And hopefully it's helpful to you guys out there and maybe gets you thinking about other gear questions or questions about anything Telemark. You guys know I'm game for whatever. I like when you challenge me and throw stuff at me that I may or may not be able to answer. So this first one's from James, and he says, I would love to get your take on mounting position for Telemark bindings in relation to the ski's recommended mounting line. I'm currently on 22 Designs axles and vices, and recently got some 22 Designs shift plates to experiment with. And then the world ended. Do you have any different recommendations for 75 millimeter versus NTN? Loving the podcast. Keep up the good work. I'm glad you're stoked on the podcast, James. Thank you for writing in. This is a incredibly good question. I was kind of going back through the old episodes. I don't know if we've actually done a specific episode to mounting, but I know in episode 8, What Makes a Great Telemark Ski, we did talk mounting points a little bit. But let me tackle this question on this episode and kind of clear up some of the murky water that is around Telemark mounts in general. And it sounds like you're kind of on the right track. The first thing is, for all the old school people out there, there is a thing called pin line. And what that line is referring to is essentially, they'll call it cord. I'm sorry, let me back up. A lot of times you'll hear this mount phrase that says mounting the pin line on cord center. So this is the old school way of mounting. I just want to address this very quickly because a lot of times you'll hear this from the old school telemarkers or even at a shop. And this is what scares me most, is you may take it to a box store or someone who doesn't deal with Telemark, and the last time they mounted a pair of Telemark skis, they mounted it like this. Cord center, pins on cord center. And so what that refers to is cord is referencing if you took a piece of string or a piece of cord and you put it from the tip to the tail on an old Telemark ski, and then you measured the distance of that cord and cut it in half, that would be your cord center. So essentially all cord center is dead center of the ski when you measure tip to tail. And then they would put the pin line of a 75 millimeter boot, which is where the holes are, on that line. Okay. That's the old school way of doing it. Traditionally, it was especially when we had double cambered skis in a kind of a more Nordic style. There are some applications where you would mount currently on certain skis. The ones I can think of are some of the waxless pattern backcountry skis that you may see. Some of them. And it's usually, in my experience, when you have double cambered skis, that you may use a pins on cord center, or they will have a recommended line that works better with the double camber. Double camber, for those that don't know what that is, was traditionally extra camber, double camber, single, double camber kind of left what's called a wax pocket. And when wax was used, they would wax like a sticky wax under that kick pocket so that you could kick and glide like a Nordic ski today. So, jumping to modern times with mounting. When people bring stuff into our shop, there are some people that have very specific mounting instructions, and there are some people that are just like, hey, we trust you. Our rule of thumb here at Freeheel Life is we go off the recommended line that the ski manufacturer has done. And the reason I say ski manufacturer is because for those of you, for instance, that might buy a 22 Designs binding, sometimes you will open up, they usually have a little poster in there with instructions on the back, and it says that you can go -2 centimeters back from the recommended line. Now, the reason I don't go off a binding manufacturer of where to put the binding is because I feel like the ski manufacturer knows best where the ski is going to ski. They've tested the ski, and they have now given you a suggestion of where to mount that binding based on your boot sole length onto the ski. So I just wanted to mention the 22 binding thing because that comes up a lot. Oh, I heard you're supposed to go -2. Yes, you could. But in most cases, what we're going to do is if you bring in a ski, we are going to look at the recommended boot center line on the ski, and then we're going to match that to your boot center. Okay? And what that does is just kind of gives you the sweet spot based on where they have suggested the ski skis best. Now, with that said, some people like to have a little more nose on the ski, more in the front, less in the back. You may refer to that as a more traditional mount position. And at that point, we will go -2 centimeters back, or we might even split the difference and go -1. But the best rule of thumb, if you don't know what you're doing and you're not super tricked out and you're not super knowledgeable, the recommended line on the ski, match it up with your boot center mark. Okay. So hopefully that answers your question. You can always call or email us, especially once we're kind of up and running. We talk a lot of people through that. If you're not near our shop, I've had other ski shops call us, and we'll walk that tech through what they're supposed to do as well. But that's what I would recommend doing. If you've got the 22 design shift plates, the only thing I was going to mention about that, you're probably referring to B&D Gear has a machined plate that they have made that can mount to a ski, and the plate stays permanently on there and uses machine screws where you can switch bindings from one ski to another. And those are cool. And that's a route to go. One thing I will mention when you go, you had asked 75 millimeter versus NTN. One thing that we have noticed, and I don't have the exact measurement in front of me, but an axle and an outlaw, there is a little bit of variance in terms of, if you, like, let's say you took an axle directly off, and we don't recommend using old holes, like where you take an axle off and use the same holes for the links or any new binding going on. However, if you were, for this example and explaining it, put into the same old holes between a 75-22 designs binding and a NTN 22 designs binding, there's actually a little bit of shift where your boot center will land. So keep that in mind. Hopefully that makes sense, everyone. Make sure, rule of thumb, to talk to the tech and make sure that they're very familiar with how to measure the boot sole center and that they understand modern day Telemark mounts versus old, just so they don't get any old info passed down. You're starting to see it less and less as time goes by, but it does happen. And I guess just to show you what would happen if somebody does a pins on cord mount with a modern day ski, we do see this happen. People come in and say, man, I got these brand new skis, and man, I hate them. They suck. And then you look at the mount and you're like, oh, that's probably because you're about 5 inches behind where you should be. And that's what happens, is you end up very far behind where you actually should be on the ski. So unfortunately that happens, and it can be fixed with a fresh mount, but try to avoid putting extra holes in the skis if you can. Good question. On to our next question. This is from my buddy Keith up in Ontario. And he just said, Hey, Josh, here's a question for your next mailbag episode. What end of season maintenance is there to do on Rotofella and 22 Designs NTN bindings? Is there any? So this is a good question. Binding maintenance in general, I'd say, is important because some bindings there's more to do than others. In this case, he's referring to Rotofella. So if he's calling out specifically NTN bindings, but I think across the board, there's certain types of bindings that are going to, like I said, require more maintenance than others. And it's always good just to look at your gear when you start putting it away for the spring over the summer, and then make sure it's dialed in when you pull it out, just to keep it safe. One of the biggest things, so let's start here. He says with the Rotofella NTN bindings. So you have the free ride and you have the freedom. Now, the free ride actually uses independent springs that kind of screw onto a cable. And any binding, and I'm going to kind of, even though he's talking or asked about NTN specifically, I'm going to use the Rotofella free ride as a great example of what to do with any binding, 75 millimeter or NTN, that has a compression spring. So a spring that's basically enclosed in like a housing. And most cable bindings, like a G3 Targa, a Volley hardwire, they're going to utilize these enclosed springs, and just like on the Rotofella free ride. And what you want to make sure when you have those enclosed springs that actually can thread on and off is it's a good idea from a maintenance standpoint to unscrew them and make sure to put some grease. What we usually use is some sort of marine grease. It's stuff you can get at Home Depot. It's made to keep things well greased under wet environments, like boating and things of that nature. But that's worked really well for us, and it's super easy. You just want to unscrew those enclosed springs, and then you're going to put a little bit of grease on there, and then you're going to screw them back on. So anything with a compression spring that can screw off, you want to make sure that you keep those well greased. The Freedom binding's a little bit trickier because it's an enclosed housing and doesn't have individual springs. There's not as much as you can, not as much to do on there. But I haven't seen as many problems with those as I have with, sometimes there's rusting that can happen with the Rotofella free ride. And on that note, one of the most rusted ones I ever see is the G3 Targa. And what happens, and to kind of show you why you need to keep them well greased, is a lot of times people end their ski season in the spring and it's wet. It's always wet, right? But like spring, it gets watery, and that might be the last time that they use them. You put your skis in your car, you get back to your house, and you throw them in your garage. And unfortunately, there's a little bit of a gap where the cable goes into those springs. And this is the same, like I said, Volley hardwire, 3-pin hardwire, switchback, any of the Volley bindings use that kind of spring housing, the G3 Targa. And what happens is the water goes in there. People put them in a hot garage, and all of a sudden it just bakes in there all summer and it rusts. And if you don't adjust those springs a lot, that rust can build up and build up and build up, and you get a seized cartridge. And the reason I'm mentioning the G3 Targa, if you guys out there are still running a G3 Targa, which is totally fine. It's one of the most popular bindings ever sold. The problem with fixing that particular binding, if you get a seized cartridge and you cannot unseize the cartridge with some WD-40 and breaking it loose, the only way to solve that problem is to cut the cable. And for those of you that have not heard, they discontinued making the G3 Targa and all the associated parts, including the cables, over 2 years ago. So if you cut that cable, it is really hard to find a replacement. So to kind of wrap up the maintenance for 22 Designs NTN bindings, quite honestly, Outlaw X, there's a couple really small springs that kind of sit on the side of the second heel lever, which is the orange part. It may be good just to check those, make sure those are not sticking and staying functional. As far as the spring, it's pretty much a large spring, and there's quite a bit of open housing. So it tends to dry out pretty well, and there's not really a way for it to seize on anything. So other than that, it's just good to give it a once over. If you have an older pair of Outlaws, and you didn't get any replacement parts, like first year Outlaw or before they went to the Outlaw X, there was some cracking that would happen in the toes and the flex plates. So it's good to give it a once over if you inherited a pair of bindings or maybe got a used pair and you didn't know much about it. Those are always good to look for, hairline cracks in the toe pieces and the flex plates. Other than that, it's a fairly straightforward kind of once over. And as far as the links goes, I don't really think, I think the only thing we were seeing this year with links was they had upgraded the flex plates for links this year, which was the second year of that product. And sometimes there was some splintering from that fiberglass composite flex plate. So keep an eye out for that. But overall, not a ton of maintenance that you're going to need to do for that. Just keep it safe. Good question. I like it. This next question's from Doug. And he says, hello from Canada. And we love our Canadian freeheelers. We love all freeheelers all over the world. But you guys are close to us. And we've had a lot of good friends from up there. So let's see. He says, I have a few thoughts I've had about the podcast. And he says, feel free to disregard, but I'm not. I'm going to read them and try to answer them. So his first one, he said, I've heard you guys talk about some books that really influenced you. For me, this was Mike and Alan's Telemark Tips. I know many people disregard this book as being too cartoony, but I think especially for younger folks, it's a great resource as it breaks things down really simple and an easy read, keeps things light, and has great visuals to help. I also have read Mike and Alan's Telemark Tips many, many years ago. I probably need to do a refresh. Like I've said in previous podcasts, there's not really like an up-to-date book, but that one seems to hold up. And if you can get a hold of a copy, that it seems to work well. And I think, especially if you're in an area, I've mentioned in a few podcasts back, like how we can help grow Telemark. One of the biggest things is literally teaching your friends and family and people that are interested in learning, going out and doing that. But if you don't, a book or a visual, having some sort of video to watch is extremely helpful. With younger kids, I don't know. That almost, and this is no disrespect to any generation, because I learned from a book myself, but I probably, in this day and age, video may be better or more attractive to a lot of people just because you're actually seeing someone do that. So I don't know if I would recommend, people seeking out a book per se. Is it a good book? Yes. Is it going to give you the basics? Yes. And honestly, I think the biggest thing that visuals like that help is learning which leg goes forward, because that is one of the bigger mistakes I've seen having taught telemark lessons in a ski school and also coming across people that have taught themselves. Their lead leg, meaning the leg that goes downhill and is forward, I've seen people actually switch it, and it's doable, but not correct. And I, to the point, I've seen some pretty amazing people somehow think that they're telemarketing, but they're actually doing it opposite, and they're ripping around like that. So yeah, books can be good like that. At this point, most of the books, in my opinion, are kind of nostalgic and fun. And like I said, they can offer some good stuff, but videos may be a better route to go. He also had a couple questions, so I'm just gonna hit him as we go here. I know there's some kind of system to get tele boots rigid enough to mount a pair of crampons and make them useful for ice climbing, but I've never been able to find any info on this. Right now, when I need to climb something gnarly, I use some full frame crampons, but they aren't ideal. And he'd love any info about how folks are dealing with this. Me personally, the first thing that sticks out, actual ice climbing, I would get ice climbing boots. If you're talking about like snow travel, where maybe more of a mountaineering type stuff, like if you listen to a couple podcasts ago, Ty Garino, I know he does a lot of ski expedition type stuff. You may want to go listen to that podcast. We didn't really get into crampons too much. It's kind of a small segment of people that are getting into where they're needing crampons. All I do know from my limited experience personally and talking to people that do use them more regularly is on an NTN boot, it's a little bit wider in the toe, and there's very few crampons that are super compatible right off the bat that work with NTN boots. I think 75 millimeter boots, you've got the duckbill, but I have a feeling that some of those might actually work easier on those. But then you've got, an extension off the front of your boot. So the short answer, if you're really trying to get specific, I would not recommend trying to use Telemark boots for ice climbs. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. If you're talking mountaineering, even if you want to hit me up, I can give you Ty Garina's email. I think his website's telemarkty.com, if I remember right off the top of my head. And that's someone who's out actually getting after it in that capacity and could probably answer that question. So, Ty Garina, you might be getting an email. I'm gonna start shoveling my questions off to you guys that might know more about this. So, his third question, which I thought was another good one, he said, "I'd love to hear some discussion about NNN-BC setups, as around here we have a ton of mellow terrain that doesn't require full setups, and that's what most folks are using to get into the backcountry and crank a few turns. Also skis that pair up with that kind of setup for actual turning." So to give you a little bit of insight into what NNN is, for those of you that do not know, it is New Nordic Norm. And that was also something created by Rotafella back in the day when cross country kind of moved from 75 millimeter toe, which is what we were using and still use with many of our Telemark bindings, when they went to this kind of tow bar thing. If you can imagine just sort of like a normal small leather boot or a composite boot, and then it has a little bar that goes across it, and that bar latches into these bindings, an NNN binding. So here's my take on that. And there's kind of this weird middle zone of where cross country sort of ends in 2020, and sort of where Telemark picks up, and there's kind of this gray area in the middle. Once Telemark stuff, 20, 30 years ago was essentially backcountry traveling Nordic stuff. And today, and we see this in Salt Lake too, because we have some friends at one of the shops I grew up shopping at, which is called Wasatch Touring. They were kind of, one of the shops that carried Telemark equipment for a long time and Nordic gear. And nowadays it's kind of funny because Freeheel Life specializes in Telemark only, and you've got Wasatch Touring does Nordic. And sometimes we get customers between us that it's almost hard to service the customer, because it's sort of somebody like Doug was saying here, is he's asking like, what kind of setup do you use? And for the rolling terrain stuff, here's what I've started doing. Waxless pattern skis. You may call it like an XCD ski. XCD can stand for cross country downhill, kind of an old term. There are, modern day skis with what's called a waxless pattern. So it's kind of under the camber of the foot. Volet makes them in a waxless pattern, and some of their skis, you can find them. Rosignol still makes them. I think Fisher's got some. But if you're looking for something, the waxless pattern basically makes it like you're not on such steep terrain that you need to put skins on the bottom. And you want something that you can kind of get to a small mellow hill and kind of climb up it, and without putting a skin on, and then it kind of rolls down and it's skiing. And so the direction, when we say waxless pattern, if you can imagine, they're almost like scales on the bottom of the ski, okay? And much like when you pet an animal, like if you pet down the back, the hair goes one direction, it's very smooth. But if you kind of run your hand back to front, the hair stands up. And so that's kind of the effect that it has with a waxless pattern. The scales go backwards. So when you're skiing forward, there's less resistance on the snow, but it's catching it on mellower steeps for climbing up without skins. So application, rolling hills, like Doug was saying in his email, and that's the type of ski that you may want to use. When we get to the binding, this is me personally, I am not a big fan of the NNN stuff. What I would do is run the way I like to put these setups together for myself is I like to use the Volet 3-pin cable binding, the original cable, and I'll explain why. You don't have to have the cable on there. It's easy to take off and put in your pack. And then you can tour up on a 3-pin binding, and then you can put the cable on for a downhill descent if you needed to, or you have a nice redundancy there because the 3-pin will latch to the boot. And if for some reason that broke, you could keep your boot in the binding along with just the cable. So there's kind of a redundancy to that, and it's lightweight and it's easy to take on and off. I also like the idea of the 3-pin setup because you can kind of put more of a Telemark centric setup together that way, and especially with the boots, because if you don't want to rock like an old leather boot, or there are some modern leather boots, but there's not really real stiff ones like in a Solo Extreme would have been made in the 90s or something like that. You can find Crispy makes some leather boots, but they're like what we call single leather. There's not a lot of reinforcement on the cuff, but that may work too. If you don't want to go leather, I like the Scarpa T4, which is available now. If you find an old T3 or even a old T2, those boots are fantastic for these types of setups. It kind of falls in between like mountain moving, and you may make a Telemark turn, but it's a technique that you're using in rolling cross-country terrain. So a lot of times that's where you're kind of at. You're where the traveling side of Telemark kind of evolved from. But if you're going to go downhill on these setups, it's going to you're probably not going to do big downhill descents on these things. It's more for like moving through the mountains, So out for a walk, you might be going with the dog up the canyon and back, no big deal. And maybe I've seen hunting setups like that where, people are needing to travel through snow. It's in my opinion, it's the traveling aspect of a Freeheel. Telemark, like I always say, is a downhill technique, but that's the answer to my question. Go waxless pattern and Volley 3-pin cable original, and either a reinforced leather boot or bump it up to some low cuff plastic like the Scarpa T4. And I think that makes a fun little setup for the quiver, and you can go to your local golf course and cruise around and whatnot. So good question, and I like that. It kind of goes, it's just other things you can do and things that let you get around and some people may be like, that's not Telemark, but like I said, Telemark's a downhill technique. You use it just like you would a parallel technique if you wanted to, but overall, it's on a Freeheel setup for you to get A to B, which we might, like I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, we might all be doing a lot more A to B type skiing this year, depending if the resort's open. So get your party pants on for some walking, people. All right. This is the next question from, and I hope sorry if I butcher the names. Sometimes my other languages are not so fine, but Friedhof from Norway. And he just says, hey, I just started listening to the podcast. Really enjoyed your episode on Majo 3.0 and the one comparing different tech bindings. I came over the comment from Pierre, who's the owner of the M Equipment, who makes Majo, on wildsnow.com, and was wondering if you guys have any insight of a boot from M Equipment. I would really love to hear an episode where you guys discuss different tele boots. So, tele boots are, I'm going to tackle, tele boots are always a topic of conversation, obviously, because I think everybody's waiting for new ones. So, the first thing I tell you to do, Friedhof, is check out the episode I did with the CEO of Scarpa North America, Kim Miller, and he kind of alludes to some new boots that they are working on. I have seen and skied in some of the prototypes myself, and there's some really cool stuff on the horizon. He explains it better, and I think gives some nice little nuggets of information for you to chew on and get stoked about that. The boot you're referring to is one that I saw a picture of as well a few years ago, and it was super like carbon looking. They kind of Frankenstein some stuff together from some AT, really lightweight AT stuff and different cuffs. I mean, it looked truly like, if you've ever seen like the Scarpa Alien, which is like a AT style lightweight, it kind of looked like that. As far as I know, I also did an episode with Pierre from M Equipment. I would suggest checking that one out. And I asked him about that boot at one point, and it was, from my recollection, it was through a shop. It was like a potential collaboration with a shop that dealt with that kind of stuff. And as far as I know, there's no boot that boot that you saw is not going to come to fruition. It was kind of just some talk. There was some photos. People got super fired up. Since then, I know, much like the other binding manufacturers, Scarpa and Crispy, I know, talk to people like Pierre and ask, their information. They're working back and forth trying to share information about, binding innovation and boot innovation. What I would say is you're probably going to see any sort of boot stuff coming from Scarpa Crispy, I don't know much about right now. I haven't heard anything from those guys. And I highly doubt Scott is going to do a new boot. That's kind of a whole nother topic in and of itself. And even me, I don't have a whole lot of info on where that may go in the future. Hopefully they continue to do it. As far as innovation, Scott, if you're out there, I'd love to talk to you, whoever's running the Telemark program there now. But yeah, so hopefully that clears that up about that particular boot that you found in the deep rabbit hole of the internet. So yep, check those other episodes out. I think that'll be a good starting point for you. All right, so on to the next question. This is from Rasmus, and he said, let's see, his question is, do you know if Rotofella has something new in the pipeline to keep up with the developments by 22 Designs and Majo? Also, from what I have read and heard, the Lynx and Majo are both better than the Freedom from Rotofella, lighter and more active. So I guess my question is, if you can recommend changing to Lynx or Majo, mainly for backcountry and touring skiing. Good question. So the way that I always approach Rotofella's bindings, first off, is they are who created the NTM platform. And there was obviously a lot of input from other people, but they are the ones that developed NTN, new Telemark norm. When the Freedom and the Freeride came out, Freeride came first, then Freedom. The way I talk about those is that was the Ferrari of its time. They kicked ass. They had all these rad features, more or less step in, and, adjustability, different spring options. And, it just, there was a lot of different things that you got out of that binding, or both of those bindings when they came out. Moving to Lynx and Majo, these are like modern day Ferraris. You're talking like Freeride and Freedom. I mean, that's almost a decade ago when those things came out. So it's not surprising that there's something better that's kind of worked off of that technology. And Tech Toe didn't even exist back then. So as far as which one to move to, if you're coming from the Freedom, honestly, between Lynx and Majo, I think you're going to be able to really find that there's quite a bit of adjustability in both of those bindings. I would say Majo may have more adjustability just because there's so many different spring options with that one. You might be able to fine tune more what you're looking for. And that's what I always say. If you're coming from a certain binding, really what you need to do is kind of figure out your style, like skiing a Freedom, for instance. It's got a lot of power and it's good torsional rigidity, and that's what NTM brought to the game. But it's not necessarily, the flex. There's more I would ask you. Is kind of where I'm getting. The first question I'd be like, are you on a green cartridge or are you on a blue? Because right then I know how stiff you're used to. And then I would start talking about your style and that sort of thing, how much you weigh. So there's actually quite a bit of factors, that may not be easy for me to give you just like a blanket statement like, oh, you're moving to this binding, go for, X. I think that's really the important thing to remember is the individuality that is based in your Telemark turn is really where you came from in terms of the bindings, stiffness of the spring or cartridge you're using, and your style. And then we kind of go from there. And that's why I said if I just had to choose one or the other, I think the Lynx and Majo ski very similarly. They obviously tour very similarly. But you have quite a bit of adjustability on the Majo in terms of different spring configurations, not as many on the Lynx. So I think that's a good starting point. And you may want to go back and listen to some of the earlier podcasts where we tackle links in Majo. There's one specifically on Majo 3.0, and that's dropping this fall. And there's a bunch of amazing features on that. Really good tow, easy to step into, yada, yada, yada. So, yes. Thank you, Rasmus. Awesome question. And, all right, on to the next one. This is from our listener, Jack. What's your take on the boot aspect of the telemark industry? Does Tele have to rely on huge, multifaceted boot companies for production as well as innovation? Do boot companies have to be gigantic to viably make and sell telemark boots? Or could there conceivably be boutique brands that could push innovation at a better and more focused pace? I guess I just can't envision what a small tele boot company would look like without it actually being a big company with a lot of resources. In other words, like large factories. And in turn, I can't foresee a strictly tele boot company actually being huge. This was kind of in response to the episode that I did that does Telemark need its own industry? So to answer this question, I mean, this is a fantastic insight into this, Jack. This is kind of what I was proposing. Is it's important, and would I love to see boutique manufacturers be able to make a telemark boot where the sole focus is telemark? 100%. I would love to see that. And I think that, I guess when you go back and listen to that industry podcast like you did, really what I'm saying is I think telemark's future is brighter when we're in control of it. So currently, yeah, it's hard to imagine that somebody that doesn't make other foot products and has access to that, like a Scarpa or a Crispy or a Scott, if you're not already making something that utilizes similar stuff, yeah, it seems totally inconceivable, and I get that. I think the value in, if we could ever get to where there was a boutique brand, I think that's where we would see a lot more innovation and more consistent innovation. But that always brings me to the same thing. The only way that you grow telemark is we have to have more telemark skiers. And that only happens if we have, again, it all goes back to access to rentals, information, equipment. So there's kind of a weird situation, right? Like, it's like, which comes first? It's a chicken or the egg type of thing. Do I think it is possible? 100%. Is it possible with the number of telemark skiers that we have right now? Probably not. So it really is going to take the vision of multiple smaller companies, in my opinion, to get to a point where the market's big enough for them to have the resources to delve into that and really take that risk. And I 100% think that could happen. I think it depends on a number of scenarios, but in the meantime, people like Scarpa that have a rich tradition of being part of the telemark community, and they're amped on helping innovate. 100%, those are the companies that I want to support, and as a community, it's really important that we support when they put out new products, because that's how we get the blood flowing for more. You kind of had a second part of this question I'm going to read right now. It says, part of a utopian telemark vision might be having tele-focused boot brands that work in tandem with binding manufacturers, big and small, to push innovation. Maybe it's something that could happen in a similar scope to 22 Designs. I think you're nailing it on the head right there. As far as small companies, is the key is that whenever we buy stuff from small companies in telemark, the important thing is that money stays within telemark, right? Like, you want it to go to creating jobs for telemark skiers that are working, whether it's a shop like Freeheel Life or at a shop or at a manufacturer like 22 Designs. The more specific it is, in my opinion, the better, because we can actually get more focus on, like you said, like competition, making new things. So what I would like to see long term is companies like, you brought up 22 Designs, and I think that's a fantastic example of what could they innovate on? Because imagine a world where 22 Designs or a Bishop or an M Equipment, what if they made a boot and they had a boot and a binding system and we all played on the same platform, which is, NTN at this point? That is where I think great change would come, we traditionally have always looked to like one group to make the boots and the other to make the bindings. And quite frankly, I'll tell you, on the behind the scenes stuff, it's frustrating sometimes when I look at it, someone who actually knows all these people, and I am blown away at sometimes the fact that there's not like really open and direct communication, and I don't know why that is, but it can improve. And the more that it improves, the better products we get. But to kind of take it down a notch, I think what could and most likely will happen in the future is small strides where a Telemark company like a 22 Designs will probably start making other things. I don't know what those things are, but what I'm suggesting is that is how you create industry. And that was the point of my industry podcast, is if you Telemark skiers wear so much equipment that if when we have to buy that equipment, we go to our Telemark brands, that means more money in the pockets of the manufacturers making those products for us that are focused on Telemark skiers, and that makes them grow, and that's what happens. I always like to go back just to kind of put a finer point on it. People are always like, I've had this conversation where I'm like, what, we should make, well, let me back up. I go back to snowboarding in the late 80s. There was a time when, imagine you're a snowboarder and you're probably buying pants from you're buying your ski pants from a ski brand. And I guarantee there was a snowboarder at one point who's like, hey, bro, because of course he said bro, right? No, I'm just kidding. I say bro all the time. Hey, bro, we should make snowboard pants. And I guarantee some of his buddies looked at that guy and they were like, well, yeah, but we have ski pants. Like, why do we need snowboard pants? And I guarantee that guy was like, yeah, but if you buy my pants, a snowboarder buying a snowboarder's pants, that money stays within snowboarding. And look at snowboarding was like this outskirts of the snow industry at the beginning. There was even like windsurfing companies involved in the beginning of that. The more you support companies that support you, the faster it grows. So take that for what it's worth. And I hope that answers your question. But I think the more we support the companies that we need to, the more we're going to get back out of it. And if we do that enough, eventually those companies can make bigger and more awesome items like boots. All right. Good one, Jack. Thanks for giving me that one. That was a good one. I get fired up when we start talking about that kind of stuff. Oof. I love it. It's really up to us, people. That's what it comes down to is, the more we care about it and the more we put into it, the more we support what we're doing, that's how you grow this thing. And if you disagree, I love that. And I think that's what makes it so that we all get there. We can't all agree on everything, and that's what makes the world turn. And I think that's an important thing to have. So, all right, this next one's from Doug. This kind of piggybacks on the last one in kind of a roundabout sort of way. Doug says, love the recent podcast as always, but it prompted a question in my mind that I have often had. For someone like me who is always trying to support the industry, I often wonder about how much I should try to support the few local shops that still carry telegear versus buying directly from you at Freeheel Life, making this kind of a loaded question, or 22 Designs. He uses 22 again. For example, this fall, I plan to pick up a second pair of Lynx bindings. Since I will obviously be paying full price no matter where I buy them, then it comes down to what's the best place to apply my money to. In Seattle, where he's from, there's a backcountry shop called, and I'm not going to say it, that still carries Telemark gear, but very begrudgingly. They know there is a market for it because all other shops that used to have it stopped. But they have vocalized several times with what a pain in the ass they think Tele is. Here's what I think about this. Doug, awesome question. And I hear this all the time because you get in this position. Here I am. I'm over here preaching like, you have to support Telemark. We have to create our own industry. We have to focus on where our money stays, yada, yada, yada. Then you go into your local community and you're like, well, the shop carries it. And funny enough, the begrudgingly part of it is fascinating to me because literally this happens all over the place, at least in the United States. And I can say that because I know firsthand, because I know a lot of these shops. I've been there myself. I've driven through. I've met with people and talked with them. And look, we all know that you may have a local shop and they may have a Telemark binding on the wall. And they also may hate Telemark skiers. So the answer to the question is I think it's best to buy from the place that can give you the best knowledge afterwards. And the reason I say that is because Telemark is so specific, make sure that you buy from somebody that has the expertise. One, I said afterwards, but really the pre-buy is just as important. During the buy is incredibly important. And the after the buy is even more important. Here's what I mean by that. Someone who walks into our shop here in Salt Lake City, the thing that is most important to me, and I tell this to all my employees, is we don't let anybody just work the floor in the front. And there's a reason. We want to make sure that you, as a front of house person that's working the floor, can answer all of the questions that can come at you from when Telemark came back into popularity in the late 1970s all the way to now. That's a lot of information. And if you don't know the answer, that we are a humble enough staff that we are going to go find the answer with someone who is here that knows the answer. And that is so crucial because that humility and trying to make sure that we understand the customer and make sure that they get what they want, that matters. It matters to us. And it matters because, like I say over and over again, Telemark is so specific and it's so personal and so personalized, and everyone's got this different feel and take. You need to be able to understand that. And you need to be able to help people get what they need. And you need to answer the questions before they buy it, because just selling it to them is not a solution. Not here anyways, and afterwards, the care that we can offer you when you text or call or shoot a DM to us on the Instagram or the Facebook, we want to be able to answer your questions. And so if you buy something from a shop just because it's on sale and you're like, I can get it cheaper here, ask yourself, can that company, shop, person, salesperson, are they going to take care of me after? And that's where I would put your money. Because, and what I'm saying is I get it. You're saying, hey, you might buy something from my shop here, from Freeheel Life versus somewhere else. The other thing that I always tell my salespeople here too is we want to be the best and the most knowledgeable. So we strive for that. We train for that. And that's part of what's fun about working here is we're always challenging each other to be the best. But hey, I know that there are some telemarketers that work at other shops around the world that are just as passionate and are very well versed in what they're doing. But I think you need to weigh that too. So basically, I guess the answer to your question, Doug, is yes, I want to see your local shop do well. No, I don't want you to buy a product from someone that's not going to help you out. And so I think that's the important thing. If you can find a local shop that is going to have the pre, during, and after care and knowledge, 100% support that shop, because we want to see more retail shops survive, especially what's going on right now, man. It's a weird time in retail, and we wish there were more places for you guys to get stuff locally, especially for trying on boots and flexing a binding and having the tangibility of stuff. That's so important. So always support your local shop, but I would, take those things into account as you're shopping, and I know how I am. It's like if I save a couple bucks, but I can't get access to answering questions later, that doesn't work for me personally. So awesome question, Doug. Thank you so much. I think I'm gonna kind of wrap it up on that one. Man, that was awesome. I had some other ones, but I'm already already like over an hour. So I love answering your questions, you guys. Thank you so much for asking me those questions, emailing them to podcast@freeheellife.com. Keep them coming. We'll always have time to do more mailbag episodes, answer those questions, and kind of delve deeper into these topics. And a lot of times you guys are great because you give me ideas for people that I can get on the podcast in the future. And I know some of the questions I even answered today, I have some guests that I've got lined up for the future that probably can answer the questions more specifically from and about their companies. So I love that. So how you can support us, kind of on that note that Doug was saying, you can always check out freeheellife.com. We're going to be restocked up kind of starting in September, moving into October. And I definitely will have more social media and website stuff going up so you guys can keep updated on that. Mailing list is a good thing too. You can sign up at freeheellife.com. If for some reason you would like to make an additional donation of your choice, you can always go paypal.me/freeheellife. It'll be in the notes on the podcast. And we always accept those and appreciate those, and it helps us move forward with building more content. Telemarkskier.com, articles, reviews, and our YouTube page is a great resource for both shop and Telemark Skier Magazine stuff. Kind of brings it all together. And like I said, you can always email me at podcast@freeheellife.com. Thank you so much for listening, my friends. It always helps if you rate and review us on the Apple Podcast platform. And I always love seeing your guys' comments there. Summer's ticking away, and before we know it, it will be snowing again. Much love to you all out there. I hope you're all doing well. I hope you have a fantastic week. And until next week, spread telemark always, my friends. Peace.